The morning sun barely filtered through the tall windows of the county courthouse as Lisa Chen sat on a hard wooden bench in the hallway. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She'd been there since 8 in the morning. Even though her case wasn't scheduled until 10:30, being early made her feel slightly more in control. Though control was the last thing she actually had right now. She clutched a manila folder against her chest. Inside were documents, photographs, and notes she'd been organizing for weeks. This was important. This mattered. But sitting there in that cold hallway, watching lawyers in expensive suits brush past her without a second glance, she felt incredibly small. Lisa wasn't a lawyer. She wasn't even supposed to be here in any official capacity today. She'd taken the morning off from her job at the library to review some files before an afternoon session. The courthouse had become familiar territory over the past month, though she never imagined she'd be spending so much time in these halls. Detective Robert Sullivan spotted her from across the lobby. He'd been a cop for 16 years, and he recognized that look. The nervous civilian, clutching papers like they were a life raft trying to blend into the bench. He'd seen it 1,000 times. Witnesses always looked like that right before they were about to make a mistake. Sullivan was tall, built like someone who'd played football in college and never quite let go of the gym habit. His badge hung from his belt, catching the fluorescent lights as he walked. He wasn't in uniform today, just dark slacks and a button-down shirt, but everything about him screamed law enforcement. The way he walked, the way he looked at people, the way he owned whatever space he entered. He made his way across the marble floor, his shoes clicking with each step. Lisa didn't notice him approaching at first. She was too focused on her notes, trying to memorize key points, making sure she had everything straight in her mind. "Morning," Sullivan said, his voice friendly enough but carrying weight. He didn't ask if he could sit down. He just took the spot next to her on the bench, close enough that she had to shift her folder to make room. Lisa looked up, startled. "Oh, good morning. You looked nervous," he said, as if he were stating something obvious and not particularly important. "First time in court?" "I've been here before," Lisa said quietly. She didn't want to have this conversation, but she also didn't want to be rude. Her parents had raised her to be polite, especially to police officers. Sullivan nodded slowly, looking at her folder. "What case you here for?" Lisa hesitated. Something felt off about this conversation, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "Just reviewing some files," she said vaguely. "Files for what?" Sullivan pressed, leaning back against the bench like he had all the time in the world. "You a paralegal or something?" "Something like that," Lisa said, pulling her folder closer. Sullivan studied her for a moment, then seemed to make a decision. His friendly expression shifted just slightly. Not quite hostile, but definitely more serious. "You know, I've been doing this job a long time," he said, "and I can always tell when someone's about to make a big mistake." Lisa's stomach tightened. "I'm sorry?" "Testifying in court cases, especially cases involving police officers, it's tricky business." He said it casually, like he was giving her friendly advice. "People think they're doing the right thing, but they don't understand how complicated things can get afterward." "I don't know what you're talking about," Lisa said. But her voice wavered. Sullivan smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Sure you do. You're here for the Rodriguez case, aren't you? The misconduct complaint against Officer Bryant." Lisa's face must have given her away because Sullivan nodded knowingly. "Thought so. Listen, I'm not here to give you a hard time. I'm actually trying to help you out. Officer Bryant is a good cop. 15 years on the force, commendations, saved lives, and now some complaint is threatening to ruin his career. I'm just here to tell the truth," Lisa managed to say. "The truth," Sullivan repeated, like he was tasting the word. "That's interesting. Because the truth can be interpreted a lot of different ways, can it? What looks like excessive force to someone who's never dealt with a violent suspect might actually be proper procedure. What sounds like harassment might just be an officer doing his job." Lisa felt her hands getting clammy. She wanted to stand up, to walk away, but her legs felt like cement. Sullivan leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "Here's the thing about testifying against cops. It makes you memorable. And not in a good way. Officers talk to each other. We remember faces. We remember names. And suddenly that routine traffic stop takes a little longer. That noise complaint from your neighbor gets taken more seriously. That background check for your next job, well, sometimes things come up." "Are you threatening me?" Lisa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Threatening?" Sullivan looked genuinely offended. No, I'm educating you. I'm telling you how the world works. You seem like a nice person. I'd hate to see your life get complicated over something that's really none of your business. Other people were walking by in the hallway. Lawyers, defendants, families of people involved in cases. No one seemed to notice the conversation happening on the bench. Or maybe they noticed and deliberately looked away. Lisa wondered how many times this exact scene had played out in this exact hallway. I have a duty, Lisa said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Sullivan laughed. A short bark that echoed off the marble walls. A duty. That's noble, really. But duty doesn't pay your bills. Duty doesn't make problems go away. You know what makes problems go away? Being smart about which battles to fight. He stood up then, brushing imaginary dust off his slacks. Looking down at her, he seemed even taller than before. Think about what I said. You've got, an hour before your session? That's plenty of time to reconsider. Nobody would blame you for having second thoughts. Memory is a funny thing. Sometimes we think we saw something clearly, but when we really think about it, we realize we're not so sure anymore. Lisa didn't respond. She couldn't. Her throat felt too tight. You seem like a smart woman, Sullivan said. I'm sure you'll make the right choice. He patted her shoulder in a gesture that might have looked friendly to anyone watching from a distance, but felt like a threat. Then he walked away, his shoes clicking confidently across the floor. Lisa sat frozen on that bench for a long moment after he left. Her hands were shaking worse than before. She looked down at her folder, at all those carefully organized documents, and felt a wave of doubt wash over her. Was this worth it? Was Truth really worth all the trouble that Detective had just promised her? She glanced around the hallway, wondering if other officers were watching. Wondering if she'd just made a terrible enemy. Wondering if she should just gather her things and leave. Pretend this morning never happened. But then she thought about Officer Bryant and what she'd witnessed. She thought about justice and what it meant, and whether it still existed if people were too scared to speak up for it. Lisa took a deep breath and opened her folder again. She had an hour to prepare. She was going to use every minute of it. What Detective Sullivan didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have guessed as he walked away feeling satisfied with his intimidation tactics, was that the scared woman on the bench wasn't who he thought she was. And in about 45 minutes, everything was going to change in a way he never saw coming. Lisa sat on that bench for another 20 minutes, trying to steady her breathing. The detective's words kept echoing in her head. Traffic stops that take longer, background checks that suddenly find problems, a life that gets complicated. She'd heard stories like this before, whispered conversations between people too afraid to speak louder. Now she understood why they whispered. She checked her watch. 10:15. Time was moving too fast and too slow all at once. Around her, the courthouse was getting busier. More people filing in for their cases. More lawyers rushing past with their briefcases. The whole building hummed with the machinery of justice, though Lisa was starting to wonder whose justice it really served. A bailiff walked down the hallway, his voice cutting through the noise. All rise for the Honorable Judge Chen presiding over Courtroom 7. Case number 2024, CR 8847, will commence in 5 minutes. Lisa's head snapped up. Chen, that was her last name. Her father's name, passed down through generations of her family who'd come to this country looking for fairness and opportunity. She'd always been proud of that name, even when kids in elementary school had made fun of it, unable to pronounce it correctly. But hearing it announced like that, in this official way, made something click in her mind. She stood up, folder in hand, and started walking toward Courtroom 7. Not to the public seating area where witnesses usually waited. Not to the back rows where nervous civilians tried to make themselves invisible. She walked straight toward the front, toward the door marked, "Authorized Personnel Only." Detective Sullivan was standing near the courtroom entrance, talking with 2 other officers. They were laughing about something, probably a joke one of them had made. He saw Lisa approaching and his face showed a flash of satisfaction. Good, he probably thought. She's going to do the smart thing and stay quiet. But then Lisa walked past the courtroom entrance. She walked past the public doors. She headed straight for the judge's chambers. Sullivan's smile faltered. He watched her, confused. Then he looked down at the papers in his hand, the case file he'd been reviewing. His eyes scanned the page once, twice, 3 times. The color started draining from his face. Case number 2024 CR 8847, the document read. Presiding Judge, the Honorable Lisa Chen. The folder fell from his hands. Papers scattered across the marble floor, but Sullivan didn't notice. He was staring at the door Lisa had just walked through, his mind trying to catch up with what his eyes had just seen. One of the other officers bent down to help pick up the papers. "You okay, Sullivan?" "You look like you've seen a ghost." Sullivan couldn't speak. His mouth opened, but no words came out. The woman he'd just threatened, the woman he'd intimidated with promises of making her life difficult, the woman he'd patronized and tried to scare into silence, wasn't a witness at all. She was the judge. The bailiff appeared in the doorway again. "Detective Sullivan, you're expected in the courtroom. The judge has requested your presence immediately." Sullivan's legs felt weak. Around him, the other officers were starting to realize something was very wrong. One of them picked up the case file from the floor and read it. His eyes went wide. "Oh no," the officer whispered. "Bobby, tell me you didn't, but Sullivan had." He absolutely had. And now he had to walk into that courtroom and face the consequences. Inside the judge's chambers, Lisa was putting on her black robe. Her hands were steadier now. The shaking had stopped the moment she'd walked through that door. There was something about putting on the robe that changed things. It wasn't just fabric. It was responsibility. It was authority. It was a reminder of why she'd worked so hard to get here. Lisa had been appointed to the district court only 3 weeks earlier. She was one of the youngest judges in the county and definitely the newest. She'd spent years as a prosecutor, then as a defense attorney, building a reputation for being fair and thorough. When the governor had appointed her, some people had questioned whether she was ready. Today, she was about to prove that she was. She looked at herself in the small mirror on the wall. The woman looking back at her seemed different from the scared person who'd been sitting on that bench 20 minutes ago. Or maybe not different. Maybe just more herself. There was a knock on the door. "Judge Chen? We're ready when you are." Lisa took a deep breath and walked out into the courtroom. The room went silent when she entered. The bailiff called out, "All rise," and everyone stood. Lisa walked to the bench, her robe flowing behind her, and took her seat. From up there, she could see everything. The prosecutor's table, the defense table, the jury box empty for now, the public gallery filled with people waiting to see justice happen. And there, standing near the back, looking like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole, was Detective Sullivan. "Please be seated," Lisa said, her voice calm and clear. It carried through the courtroom with an authority she'd been practicing for weeks but had never quite felt until this moment. She looked directly at Sullivan. Their eyes met. She saw him swallow hard, saw the sweat forming on his forehead despite the cool air conditioning. "Detective Sullivan," she said, "please approach the bench." The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the detective's footsteps as he walked forward. Each step seemed to take forever. The other officers in the room shifted uncomfortably, sensing that something unusual was happening. Sullivan stood before the bench looking up at Lisa. The height difference was symbolic now. She was above him, literally and figuratively, and they both knew it. "Detective," Lisa began, her voice measured, "approximately 30 minutes ago, you approached me in the hallway outside this courtroom. Do you remember that conversation?" Sullivan's mouth was dry. "Your Honor, I didn't know." "I asked if you remember the conversation, Detective. Yes or no?" "Yes, Your Honor." Lisa leaned forward slightly. "In that conversation, you told me that testifying against police officers makes people memorable. You suggested that traffic stops might take longer for someone like me. You implied that my background checks might suddenly have problems. You told me my life could get complicated. Is that an accurate summary?" The courtroom erupted in whispers. The prosecutors at their table exchanged shocked glances. Defense attorneys in the gallery leaned forward, not wanting to miss a word. Sullivan looked like he might be sick. "Your Honor, I thought you were a witness." Lisa finished for him. "Yes, I gathered that. So let me be clear, Detective. You thought I was a civilian witness and you decided to intimidate that person. You used your position as a law enforcement officer to threaten someone you believed was about to testify in a court case. Is that correct?" Sullivan's silence was answer enough. Lisa sat back in her chair. She wasn't angry exactly. Anger would have been easier. What she felt was disappointment. Disappointment that this kind of behavior still happened. Disappointment that an officer with 16 years of experience thought this was acceptable. Disappointment that she probably wasn't the first person he'd done this to. Just the first one with the power to do something about it. Detective Sullivan, she said. I'm going to ask you to wait in the hallway while I decide how to proceed. Bailiff, please ensure the detective remains available. Your Honor, please, Sullivan started. That will be all, Detective. Sullivan turned and walked out of the courtroom. Every eye followed him. When the door closed behind him, the whispers started again, louder this time. Lisa banged her gavel once. Order. The room fell silent immediately. She looked out at the faces in the courtroom. Lawyers who'd been practicing for decades. Court staff who'd seen everything. Police officers who suddenly looked very uncomfortable. And in the back, a few civilians who'd come for their own cases but were witnessing something they'd probably never forget. This court will take a 15-minute recess, Lisa announced. When we return, I will address this matter fully. She stood and everyone rose with her. As she walked back to her chambers, Lisa felt the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about one detective making a mistake. This was about a system that had allowed this behavior to flourish. A culture where intimidating witnesses was just part of the job. But as she closed the door to her chambers, Lisa felt something else too. Determination. She'd become a judge to make sure justice was fair for everyone. Today, she was going to start proving that she meant it. Lisa sat in her chambers staring at the legal pad on her desk. She'd filled half a page with notes, documenting everything Detective Sullivan had said to her in that hallway. Every threat, every veiled warning, every word designed to make her afraid. Her hand was steady as she wrote, but her mind was racing. This wasn't just about one conversation anymore. This was bigger than Sullivan, bigger than her, maybe even bigger than this courthouse. She'd been a judge for 3 weeks, but she'd been a lawyer for 8 years before that. She knew what witness intimidation looked like. She'd seen cases fall apart because people were too scared to testify. She'd watched guilty people walk free because the one person who could have made a difference suddenly couldn't remember what they'd seen. Now she understood why. There was a soft knock on her door. "Come in," she called. Her clerk, David, stepped inside. He was older than Lisa, maybe in his 50s, and had been working in the courthouse for 20 years. He'd seen judges come and go. "Judge Chen, the attorneys are getting restless. They want to know what's happening." "I'm sure they do," Lisa said, not looking up from her notes. "What are people saying out there?" David hesitated. "There are a lot of theories. Some people think Sullivan is in trouble. Others think maybe this is all a misunderstanding." "It's not a misunderstanding," Lisa said firmly. She looked up at David. "He thought I was a witness. He threatened me because he thought I was going to testify against one of his fellow officers. He told me my life would get complicated if I went through with it." David's face went pale. "Oh no. Oh yes." Lisa set down her pen. "And here's what I keep thinking about. If he did this to me thinking I was just some random civilian, how many other people has he done this to? How many witnesses have been scared into silence by Detective Sullivan and officers like him?" "That's a serious allegation, Your Honor." "It's a serious problem," Lisa corrected. "And I need to figure out what to do about it." David pulled up a chair without being asked. "Can I speak freely?" "Please, you're new," he said gently. "You're the youngest judge in this district. Some people already think you haven't earned this seat. If you come down too hard on a decorated detective, there are going to be consequences. Political consequences. Career consequences," Lisa nodded slowly. "And if I don't come down hard enough? Then you send a message that this kind of behavior is acceptable." "Exactly." Lisa stood up and walked to the window. Outside, she could see the city stretching out in all directions. Somewhere out there were people who'd been intimidated just like she had been. People who'd stayed quiet because they were scared. "I didn't become a judge to play it safe, David. I became a judge to make sure the law applies to everyone equally. Even when it's hard?" "Especially when it's hard," David stood up. "Then I'll tell them you'll be ready in 5 minutes." After he left, Lisa took a moment to collect herself. She thought about her father, who'd worked 2 jobs to put her through college. She thought about her mother, who'd always told her that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. She thought about all the people she'd never meet who'd been scared into silence by someone like Sullivan. Then she put her hand on the doorknob and walked back into the courtroom. Everyone stood as she entered. The room was packed now. Word had spread through the courthouse that something unusual was happening in courtroom 7. Lawyers who didn't have cases there had found excuses to stick around. Court staff had found reasons to be nearby. Even the local legal reporter from the newspaper had slipped into the back row. Lisa took her seat and looked around the room. "Bring Detective Sullivan back in." The bailiff opened the door, and Sullivan walked in. He looked smaller somehow, like the weight of the situation had physically shrunk him. His confidence was gone. His swagger had disappeared. He stood before the bench like a man waiting for a sentence. "Detective Sullivan," Lisa began, her voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "What happened in the hallway this morning presents me with a very difficult situation. You attempted to intimidate someone you believed was a witness in a court case. The fact that I turned out to be a judge doesn't change the intent of your actions. If anything, it reveals what you thought was acceptable behavior toward an ordinary citizen." Sullivan opened his mouth to speak, but Lisa held up her hand. "I'm not finished," she said. "In your conversation with me, you made it clear that this wasn't your first time doing something like this. You spoke with the confidence of someone who'd done it before and gotten away with it. You detailed exactly how you could make someone's life difficult. You knew the playbook because you'd run these plays before." The courtroom was absolutely silent. People were barely breathing. "Now I could handle this quietly," Lisa continued. "I could call you into chambers, give you a stern warning, and let you go on your way. That would certainly be easier for everyone involved. It wouldn't make waves. It wouldn't create problems. But it also wouldn't change anything, would it?" Sullivan's jaw clenched, but he didn't answer. "Here's what I'm going to do," Lisa said, her voice steady and clear. "First, I'm referring this matter to the Internal Affairs Division of your department. They need to investigate whether this is part of a pattern of behavior. Second, I'm referring this matter to the State Attorney General's office for potential charges of witness intimidation and obstruction of justice. Third, you are hereby barred from this courthouse until these investigations are complete, unless you are specifically summoned." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The prosecutors at their table looked shocked. The police officers in the gallery shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor," Sullivan finally spoke, his voice cracking slightly. "I've been a cop for 16 years. I've got commendations. I've served this city." "And in 16 years," Lisa interrupted, "you should have learned that your badge doesn't give you the right to threaten people. Your service to this city doesn't excuse intimidating civilians who are trying to participate in our justice system. Those commendations don't erase what you did this morning." Sullivan's face turned red. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you don't understand what it's like out there. You don't know what we deal with every day." "You're right," Lisa said. "I don't know what it's like to be a police officer. But I do know what it's like to be threatened by someone with power. I know what it feels like to be told that telling the truth could ruin my life. And I know that if you made me feel that way, someone with authority and legal training, imagine how ordinary people feel when you do it to them." The silence in the room was deafening. "Furthermore," Lisa continued, "I'm issuing a standing order for this courtroom. Any witness who reports feeling intimidated or threatened by any party, including law enforcement, will be granted immediate protective measures. This courtroom will be a safe place for people to tell the truth, regardless of who that truth might inconvenience." She looked directly at Sullivan. "You came into this courthouse this morning thinking you could scare someone into silence. You were wrong. And if there are other officers out there who think the same way, I hope they're paying attention right now." Lisa turned to the bailiff. "Please escort Detective Sullivan out and contact the Chief of Police. I want a meeting scheduled for this afternoon to discuss new protocols for officer conduct in this courthouse." Sullivan stood there for a moment, looking like he wanted to say something else. But what could he say? He'd been caught. Everyone had heard what the judge said. Denying it would only make things worse. As the bailiff led him toward the door, Lisa called out one more time. "Detective Sullivan," he turned back. "I want you to think about something," she said. "Think about all the people you've done this to over the years. All the witnesses who stayed quiet because you scared them. All the cases where justice wasn't served because someone was too afraid to speak up. Think about whether that's the legacy you want to leave behind." Sullivan didn't respond. He just turned and walked out. the door closing behind him with a heavy thud that seemed to echo through the entire courthouse. Lisa sat back in her chair. Her heart was pounding, but she felt something else too. Relief. She'd done what she knew was right, even though it was hard, even though there would be consequences. Around the courtroom, people were still processing what they'd just witnessed. Some looked approving, others looked concerned. A few officers in the gallery looked downright angry. Lisa didn't care. She banged her gavel once. This court will now proceed with today's docket. Next case. And just like that, the wheels of justice kept turning. But something had changed. Everyone in that room knew it. The rules were different now. At least in courtroom 7, truth mattered more than fear. The news spread through the city like wildfire. By lunchtime, every courthouse employee knew what had happened. By dinner, it was on the local news. By the next morning, Judge Lisa Chen's name was trending on social media, and her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Lisa sat in her chambers 3 days after the incident, reading through the stack of messages that had piled up on her desk. Some were supportive. Many were angry. A few were threatening enough that David had already forwarded them to courthouse security. Judge Chen, David knocked and entered without waiting for an answer. He looked worried. The police chief is here for that meeting you requested, and he brought the union president with him. Lisa closed her eyes for a moment. She'd known this was coming. Show them in. Chief Raymond Torres walked in first. He was in his late 50s with gray hair and the weathered face of someone who'd spent 30 years in law enforcement. Behind him came Kevin Walsh, the head of the police union, younger and harder around the edges. Judge Chen, the chief said, his voice carefully neutral. He didn't sit down even though Lisa gestured to the chairs. We need to talk about what happened with Detective Sullivan. I agree, Lisa said. That's why I asked you here. Walsh jumped in before the chief could continue. You humiliated one of our officers in open court. You referred him to internal affairs and the attorney general without even hearing his side of the story. Do you have any idea what you've done? Lisa kept her voice calm. I know exactly what I've done. Detective Sullivan threatened someone he believed was a witness. He attempted to intimidate that person out of testifying. The fact that the person turned out to be me doesn't change what he intended to do. He made a mistake, Walsh said sharply. He didn't know who you were. That's exactly my point, Lisa replied. He didn't know who I was, so he thought it was okay to threaten me. What does that tell you about how he treats people when he does know who they are? Chief Torres held up his hand, cutting off whatever Walsh was about to say. Judge Chen, I'm not here to defend what Sullivan did, but I am here to tell you that your actions have created a situation. My officers are upset. They feel like you've made them all look bad because of one person's mistake. One person's mistake that revealed a bigger problem, Lisa said. She pulled out a folder from her desk. Since word got out about what happened, I've received 47 calls and emails from people claiming they were intimidated by police officers before court cases. 47, in 3 days. The chief's face darkened. Walsh looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. These aren't just complaints about Sullivan, Lisa continued, opening the folder. Different officers, different cases, different years, but the same pattern. Officers approaching witnesses before trials, making comments about how testifying might not be a good idea, suggesting that life gets harder for people who go against the police. Those are just allegations, Walsh said. People lie. People make things up. Some might be lying, Lisa acknowledged. But all of them? Every single one? I was a prosecutor before I was a judge, Mr. Walsh. I know what a pattern looks like. This is a pattern. Chief Torres finally sat down. He suddenly looked very tired. What do you want from us? I want change, Lisa said simply. Real change, not just suspending Sullivan and Ho. Ping, this blows over. I want new protocols. I want training on witness rights. I want accountability. And if we don't agree, Walsh asked. Lisa looked at him steadily. Then I'll make sure every one of these complaints is investigated thoroughly. I'll hold hearings. I'll bring in witnesses. And I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what's been happening in this city's justice system." The room fell silent. Walsh looked like he wanted to flip the desk over. The chief just stared at his hands. "There's something else you should know," Lisa said, her voice softer now. "I didn't want this fight. I just wanted to do my job. But Sullivan forced this issue, and now we're here. We can either fix this together, or we can fight about it in public. Which one is going to be better for your officers?" "Better for this city." Chief Torres looked up at her. "You're asking us to admit there's a systemic problem." "I'm asking you to acknowledge reality," Lisa said, "and then do something about it." The meeting lasted another hour. By the end, they'd agreed to several changes. Mandatory training on witness intimidation, a new policy requiring officers to report any contact with witnesses, an independent review board to examine past cases where witnesses had suddenly changed their testimony. It wasn't everything Lisa wanted, but it was a start. After they left, Lisa sat alone in her chambers. She felt exhausted, like she'd run a marathon. David poked his head in. "How did it go?" he asked. "About as well as could be expected," Lisa said. "They agreed to some reforms. That's good news." "Maybe." Lisa wasn't sure yet. "We'll see if they actually follow through." Over the next few weeks, Lisa learned just how complicated doing the right thing could be. The local police union issued a statement saying she'd overreached her authority. Conservative talk radio hosts called her anti-police. Her old law school friends texted her asking if she was okay. But something else was happening too. People started coming forward. Real witnesses who'd been scared into silence years ago. They told stories that made Lisa's stomach turn. A woman who'd witnessed police brutality, but was told her immigration status might become a problem if she testified. A man who'd seen evidence tampering but was warned that old warrants might suddenly be remembered. A teenager who'd been threatened with juvenile detention if she didn't change her story. The Attorney General's office opened a full investigation. Internal Affairs suspended 3 more officers pending review. The mayor called for reforms, and slowly, grudgingly, things started to change. Detective Sullivan himself became a strange kind of symbol. His case worked its way through the system. He cooperated with investigators, probably hoping for leniency. He gave names. He described tactics. He admitted that intimidating witnesses was something that happened more often than anyone wanted to acknowledge. Lisa watched all of this unfold from her bench. Every day she put on her robe and heard cases. Theft cases, assault cases, drug cases. The regular machinery of justice. But people in her courtroom seemed different now. Witnesses stood a little taller. Defense attorneys pushed back a little harder. And police officers who testified seemed more careful, more aware that someone was watching. Not everyone was happy about it. Lisa received hate mail. Someone spray-painted "traitor" on her car. She needed security escorts to and from the courthouse for a while. Her family worried. Her mother called every day asking if she was safe. "I'm fine, Mom," Lisa would say. "I'm doing what needs to be done, but at what cost?" her mother would ask. Lisa didn't have a good answer for that. The cost was high. She'd made powerful enemies. She'd complicated her own career. Some judges wouldn't even talk to her anymore, afraid of being associated with someone who'd caused so much trouble. But then she'd get a letter from someone like Patricia Gomez, a woman who'd been too scared to testify 5 years ago, but was now coming forward. Patricia wrote, "I saw your story on the news. I saw what you did even though it was hard. It made me think maybe I could be brave too. Maybe it's not too late for the truth." Lisa kept that letter in her desk drawer. On hard days when the pressure felt like too much, she'd take it out and read it again. This was why she'd become a judge. Not for the easy cases, not for the simple decisions, but for moments like this when standing up actually meant something. 6 weeks after the confrontation with Sullivan, Lisa was working late in her chambers when David knocked on the door. "Judge Chen, there's someone here to see you." "I'm not taking any more meetings today," Lisa said without looking up. "I think you'll want to take this one." Lisa looked up and saw a young woman standing nervously in the doorway. She looked familiar somehow. "Hi," the woman said quietly. "My name is Kelly Wright. I was supposed to testify against Officer Bryant 3 months ago, but I got scared and didn't show up. I heard about what you did, about what happened with that detective, and I was wondering, is it too late? Can I still tell the truth?" Lisa felt something shift in her chest. She stood up and walked around her desk. It's never too late for the truth, she said, and come in. Let's talk. As Kelly sat down and began to tell her story, Lisa realized something important. What had started as one confrontation in a courthouse hallway had become something bigger. A movement, a shift, a message that intimidation wouldn't work anymore, at least not in her courtroom. The fight wasn't over. It might never be over. But for the first time since that morning on the bench, Lisa felt like maybe, just maybe, she was winning. 8 months had passed since that morning in the courthouse hallway. Lisa stood at her office window watching the sun set over the city. The leaves were changing colors, autumn settling in with its crisp air and golden light. So much had changed since that spring day when Detective Sullivan had made the biggest mistake of his career. Sullivan himself was no longer a detective. After the Attorney General's investigation concluded, he'd been given a choice: resign quietly or face criminal charges. He chose resignation. Last Lisa heard, he was working as a security consultant for a private company. His badge was gone. His pension reduced. His reputation in law enforcement destroyed. Some people thought that was too harsh. Others thought it wasn't harsh enough. Lisa tried not to think about it too much. She'd done what needed to be done, and Sullivan had faced the consequences of his own actions. That was all she could control. What she hadn't expected were all the other consequences. The ripples that kept spreading outward in ways she never imagined. The internal affairs investigation had led to the suspension of 5 more officers. 2 had been fired. 3 were on probation with mandatory retraining. The police union had fought it every step of the way, but the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Too many witnesses, too many similar stories, too many cases where justice had been derailed by intimidation. The department had implemented new protocols, just as the chief had promised in that tense meeting months ago. Officers now had to log any contact with witnesses. There was a hotline for people to report intimidation attempts. Training sessions on witness rights had become mandatory. It wasn't a perfect system, but it was better than what existed before. Lisa's phone buzzed. A text from David. Press conference starting in 5 minutes. Thought you'd want to watch. She turned on the small TV in her office. The mayor was standing at a podium, flanked by the police chief and several community leaders. The caption at the bottom of the screen read, "City announces police reform initiative." Today marks an important step forward for our city, the mayor said. In the past 8 months, we've learned some difficult truths about problems in our justice system, but we've also seen what's possible when people have the courage to speak up. The mayor went on to announce a new civilian oversight board, additional funding for witness protection programs, and stricter accountability measures for officer misconduct. Lisa knew her name would never be mentioned in this press conference. Politicians didn't like giving credit to judges who'd caused them political headaches. But she also knew that none of this would be happening if she hadn't stood her ground that day. There was a knock on her door. "Come in," she called. Kelly Wright stepped inside, looking far more confident than she had 6 months ago when she'd first come to Lisa's office. Kelly had finally testified in the Officer Bryant case. Her testimony, along with evidence from other witnesses who'd found their courage, had led to Bryant's termination and conviction. He was currently serving 18 months for assault and abuse of power. "Judge Chen," Kelly said with a smile, "I just wanted to stop by and say thank you again." "You don't have to keep thanking me," Lisa said. "You're the one who had the courage to testify." "I wouldn't have done it without you showing me it was possible," Kelly replied. "You stood up to them when everyone said you shouldn't. That mattered." After Kelly left, Lisa sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop and looked at her calendar. Tomorrow she had 12 cases scheduled. Routine stuff mostly. A theft case, a custody dispute, a contract disagreement, the everyday work of a judge that didn't make headlines or change systems. But that was okay. Lisa had learned that justice wasn't always dramatic. Most of the time it was quiet and steady, the slow work of making sure the law applied fairly to everyone who walked through those courtroom doors. Her email pinged, a message from Patricia Gomez, the woman who'd written her that letter months ago. Patricia had finally testified in her case too, 5 years after the incident she'd witnessed. The officer involved had been disciplined, though not fired. It wasn't the outcome Patricia had hoped for, but it was something. It was acknowledgement that what happened mattered. "Judge Chen," Patricia's email read, I wanted you to know that I'm speaking at a community meeting next week about witness rights. Me, speaking in public. I never thought I'd have the courage. But you showed me that speaking up can make a difference. Thank you for being brave when it mattered most. Lisa felt tears prick at her eyes. She'd received dozens of messages like this over the months. People thanking her. People telling her she'd inspired them. People sharing their own stories of finally finding their voice. It hadn't all been positive, of course. She'd lost friends over this. Some colleagues still gave her the cold shoulder. There were judges in the courthouse who thought she'd made their jobs harder by rocking the boat. Defense attorneys who blamed her for making police officers more defensive on the stand. Prosecutors who thought she'd undermined law enforcement. Lisa's career had taken hits too. She'd been passed over for a high-profile case assignment that probably would have been hers otherwise. The Judicial Review Board had given her evaluation marks that were lower than expected. Someone had started a petition calling for her removal, though it hadn't gone anywhere. Her mother had been right to worry about the cost, but sitting there in her office, reading these messages from people like Patricia and Kelly, Lisa knew she'd make the same choice again. Some things were worth the cost. Some stands needed to be taken even when they were hard. There was another knock at her door. David again. Judge Chen, there's someone here who'd like to speak with you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. A young woman entered, maybe 25 years old, looking nervous but determined. Judge Chen? My name is Jennifer Tam. I'm a law student at the State University. I'm writing my thesis on witness intimidation and police accountability. And your case is at the center of my research. Lisa smiled. I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk to about this. You're exactly the right person, Jennifer said, pulling out a notebook. What you did changed the conversation in this city. Law professors are teaching about your case. Police departments in other cities are looking at what happened here and implementing their own reforms. You started something. I just did my job, Lisa said. That's what makes it so powerful, Jennifer replied. You weren't trying to be a hero. You just refused to let intimidation win. And that simple act of courage rippled outward in ways you probably don't even realize. They talked for an hour. Jennifer asked thoughtful questions about the decision-making process, about the pressure Lisa had faced, about what advice she'd give to other judges in similar situations. By the end, Lisa felt like she'd learned something too. Sometimes you're too close to a situation to see its real impact. After Jennifer left, Lisa stayed late finishing paperwork. It was nearly 8 o'clock when she finally packed up her briefcase. The courthouse was quiet at this hour, just a few security guards making their rounds. As she walked through the hallway where Sullivan had confronted her 8 months ago, Lisa paused. She could still remember exactly where she'd been sitting. Could still feel the fear she'd felt when he'd started making his threats. Could still hear his voice telling her that testifying would make her life complicated. He'd been right about that in a way. Her life had gotten complicated, just not in the ways he'd intended. Lisa continued walking, her footsteps echoing off the marble floors. She passed courtroom 7, her courtroom where she'd made the decision to hold Sullivan accountable, where she'd issued her standing order protecting witnesses, where she'd shown that fear wouldn't win, at least not in her space. Outside, the evening air was cool and fresh. Lisa breathed it in deeply. Her car was in the parking garage, and tomorrow there would be 12 more cases to hear. Next week there would be more after that. The work continued as it always did, but as she walked to her car, Lisa felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. Not because everything was perfect. Not because all the problems were solved, but because she knew deep in her bones that she'd done the right thing. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. Judge Chen, you don't know me, but I wanted to thank you. I was intimidated out of testifying 3 years ago. I've lived with that guilt ever since. Watching what you did gave me the courage to finally come forward. The case is being reopened. Justice is getting another chance. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to do the right thing. Lisa smiled and got into her car. The fight for justice was never really over. There would always be more work to do, more stands to take, more moments when courage mattered. But tonight, driving home through the city streets as the stars began to appear overhead, Lisa Chen felt like maybe, just maybe, she was exactly where she was supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do, being the kind of judge who believed that everyone deserved justice. Even when it was hard, even when it cost something, especially then, because in the end, that's what the robe meant. That's what the oath meant. That's what justice meant, and no amount of intimidation would ever change that.